You're listening to Strange by Nature, your guide to the strange, weird, unbelievable, and improbable wonders of the natural world.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I am Kirk Mona, and I am joined today by Rachel Ginza and Victoria Thompson. We are all professional naturalists who together have scoured the world for weird and wonderful wonders just to please your mammalian brain's desire for novelty. Isn't that nice? Let's do this.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Hey, Kirk.
Hey, Rachel, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. How about you?
Well, I have a cold, so that's real fun. But I'm pushing on through. I'll be fine. It's not stopping me.
Nah, you don't sound that bad.
Well, that's good.
Which is great, and I hope you honestly feel better because I know you got a trip coming up.
I do. By the time this airs, it will be over. So don't think of coming and burglarizing my house. But yeah, I am going on a little trip to London. So I will maybe find some fun ideas for stories when I'm there. We'll see.
Ooh. Well, I'm gonna make you think a little bit here this morning. My goodness, it is fully whatever time you're listening to this.
Who knows? Yeah, it could be morning while they're listening.
It could be fun. Kirk, what do you think of when you think of the word worms? What do you think of?
Yeah. Well, Rachel, I think of worms, like I think most people.
Well, yeah. What? Go through the imagery in your head.
So many things come to mind. I mean, everything from, like the sandworms on Dune to, frankly, because of my job and whatnot. Yep. I think about the ecological role of worms and how the forest where I work is not supposed to have worms, and yet it does, and what destruction that is causing. I also think about going to Wood Lake Nature Center as a child with a Cub Scout troop, and we used the little probes you put in the ground to make the worms come up out of the ground, and then dissected them to learn about their insides, and then chopped them up and baked them into chocolate chip cookies. That was an actual program they did back in the 80s.
I feel like I've seen that recipe somewhere, and that's done me into silence, Kirk.
Look, I'm going to be clear. I did not eat the cookies, and I am a big fan of chocolate chip cookies, and when those came out, I just went, no, I'm good. That's cool.
That's because they were earthworm chocolate chip cookies.
Desire in eating a worm. I'm sure you couldn't taste it, but no, I'm good. I don't want to eat worms.
Well, okay. Well, what do you think about flatworms?
Oh, flatworms. That's a whole other kind of worm. To be totally honest, I don't think about them very much.
You know what? Neither do I. But this week, I very much did. So
okay, cool.
Right. So for folks that don't know, flatworms or planaria in general are aquatic creatures. They really love being in the ocean. They'll be in some lakes and things. They remind me a little bit like leeches because they're flat and they go around eating smaller critters and microorganisms and things like that. Some of them will even eat algae, but they kind of remind me of, they are what they sound like. They're worm-like, they're long, they're skinny, and they're flat.
Yeah.
Flatworms. But what about the ones that don't do that, Kirk?
Which part of it?
So what if I told you that there are planaria that live on land?
Really?
Uh-huh.
I would say I did not know that.
Uh-huh. There are a few different species, and generally speaking, when it comes to identifying flatworms, especially the land flatworms, you have to dissect them in order to really get a good idea down to species. So when I am talking about this, I'm broadly going in a genre or a genus of worm, of flatworm, not necessarily species level, although the species all have these different characteristics.
Okay.
So these are planaria that live on land. And when I say on land, I mean in the soil. Okay?
Okay.
For the most part, they love being in like high humidity and warmer, more tropical spaces. And
Okay, that would make sense.
It does make sense, right? And their more native range is Southeast Asia. Okay, so think Vietnam, Malaysia, that general scope of space.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
However, they have been found outside of that. They've been found in California, they've been found in Georgia, they've been found in Texas, the Carolinas, they've been found in greenhouses much further north, like Massachusetts, Canada.
Wow.
They've been found in Mexico. So they're everywhere of sorts.
Nice.
And what a wild thing to look at. The particular genus that I want to talk about is the broad-headed planarian, also known as the hammerhead flatworm.
Okay. I can picture it.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Also known as the lanchovy.
Oh, wait, hold on. A what?
Lanchovy.
Landchovy.
Like anchovy, but land.
Yeah, no, I got it. Yeah, landchovy. Okay. All right. This is more and more making me think that someone has eaten these, but okay.
No, they really haven't, and I'll tell you why. So,
Okay.
we'll
Don't
get
put
to
them in
it.
your cookies, huh?
Absolutely not. So these planaria, they're like the really flat earth, they're flat worms, right? They have some stripes depending on the species. Sometimes they are gray, sometimes they're green, sometimes they're tan or really dark brown, but a lot of them have like a lateral line of stripes, which is pretty cool.
Okay.
And where we would assume their head has like a flat spade-like protuberance or edge. So the end where we would look at, be like, that's their head, is flat and looks a lot like a shovel in shape.
Yeah, so that's kind of where the hammerhead.
Exactly. That's
from.
why it's called a hammerhead, is because it looks like a hammer was taken to the head.
Or like a hammerhead shark, I was thinking.
Exactly.
The wide, flat head, yeah.
Same thing. Now these worms, these flatworms, can grow anywhere from 5 to 20 centimeters. But depending on the species, they have found them growing up to a foot long, which is too long for something that lives on land. That is too long.
That's wild.
Isn't it?
I can't picture a foot-long flatworm. I mean, I can. I don't want to.
I don't want to either, but they are there.
Okay.
Uh-huh. So, like I was saying, generally they need a more moist environment to live in. So, think of where you find slugs, and that's generally where you will find these broad-headed flatworms. So they're not going to be found really in the deserts all that much, but they do love potting soil, which is how we think that they got here from Southeast Asia, was they were carted over in plants that were in soil and pots and brought over from those spaces to be sold in other spaces, you know?
Makes sense.
Capitalism. So they also really love dark places. Are you with me so far, Kirk?
Absolutely, yeah. Moist, dark places.
Right.
Check.
Flathead.
Sorry, I just really creeped a lot of people out by saying the word moist.
I mean, so did I.
At least I didn't say the word slacks.
Oof.
That's also a tough one.
So
anyhow, moving on.
Let's get weird, Kirk. If this wasn't weird enough, let's get weirder.
Yeah.
So the broadhead planaria are predators, just like all of the other like flatworms that are around.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
There has been scientific studies that show that these planaria are able to track down and hunt earthworms or other flatworms. So they've been able to actually track them down. But the other thing that was wild while I was doing my research, that I was like, okay, was their mouth isn't where you think it is. So you look at the flatworm and you would think it would be underneath that spade part, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right. It's in the middle of their body.
Huh.
And what they do when they catch their prey is they wrap around it and just like chomp at the end and like serrate it off of sorts. Or they take their tube out of their mouth and just suction at the food, the worm.
Is this one of those things where they're basically digesting animals outside of their body and then drinking it up?
Pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, you see that a lot in nature. I think we think of it as strange because it's definitely not how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, when you're trying to eat things that are the same size as you, that you can't fit into a stomach that would have to be bigger than you are, it makes a lot of sense.
It does. So they are just trying to eat, which makes complete sense. It's just slightly horrifying because they do cover them with slime and then they digest it outside of their body and then bring it into the rest of their body. Or digest their prey outside and then bring the digested bits into their body.
Yeah. Wow.
Oof. The other part that I found very wild, so these produce asexually. So what will happen is near the rear of the worm, they'll break off a portion, and that portion will produce a new head, grow its own head. And just
right, that's one of the things I remember
grow.
about flatworms, that, you know, you can just cut them in half and they grow into 2 different flatworms.
Exactly. So that's one thing. The other bizarre part about this worm, Kirk, you've heard of tetrodotoxin, right?
I love how you just assume, like, you've heard of this, right? It doesn't ring a bell, actually.
So it's the same neurotoxin that pufferfish produce.
Oh, okay. All right.
And like the blue ring octopus, which Victoria covered.
Right. So this is where the don't eat it part comes into play?
Exactly. Don't eat this because they produce this. This is the first land invertebrate that produced tetrodotoxin. There's no cure, and tetrodotoxin is, I think Victoria covered it, but is very bad, and it will very much shut down your entire body. Oof. Because what it does is it's a sodium blocker, so it prevents neuro messages from going into your brain and connecting with your muscles. So paralysis comes first, and then respiratory distress, and then you just, because you're not breathing, you die.
Wow, yeah.
And that happens within 4 to 6 hours. If you can, and like I said, there's no cure for that particular toxin either. So what ends up happening is if you can survive the first 24 hours in the hospital on life support and they can get you through that, then you'll be fine. But you have to get through that first 24 hours.
You need that
first.
the support to do the things that your body's not doing.
So it's not good. So don't.
Okay, so not
these.
Cutting them up and putting them in cookies. Noted.
Do not do that. No. Also, don't handle them and wash your hands thoroughly if you do handle them. Yeah. But these are some wild worms. I don't exactly remember. I think my friend David actually talked to me about it. He's like, hey, have you heard of the hammerhead flatworm? I'm like, no, you should tell me more. So thanks, David.
Wow, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So that's all I have for you all this week. My sources were a variety of state extension services, including Mississippi, North Carolina, Florida, as well as the USDA, National Invasive Species Information Center, and this really wild article in ThoughtCo. Had a really solid write-up from Anne Marie Helmelstein, PhD. It was awesome. So thanks all.
Cool.
Yeah.
You know what occurs to me when you mention that a lot of our international listeners probably don't know what an extension service is.
Ooh.
I think that may be a very American thing.
Huh.
An extension service is usually associated with a university.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like an outreach department that usually does a lot of agricultural based information for farmers and gardeners, and just passing on a lot of natural history information
Yeah.
to the populace. Kind of take a lot, this is from a lot of like land grant universities, especially,
Oh, yeah.
which are, have a mandate to work with, the outdoors and farms and things. And so part of that is returning information that the taxpayers paid for back to the taxpayers by having these extension services that disseminate information around the state from what's being learned at the university. So
It's really
good
cool.
sources of information.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's all I have for you this week. We're going to
Cool.
take a quick break, and when we return, Kirk, you're up.
Sure am. Welcome back, everybody. Rachel, I want you to imagine you're out for a hike. Probably not too hard to imagine, right?
It's not that hard to imagine, no.
It's summertime, you're wearing shorts because it's hot out, and as you climb over some rocks, you feel a sharp pain in your leg.
Oh, dear.
You've just been bitten by a venomous snake.
What? No, I haven't.
You have, Rachel, you have. Now
No.
here,
I
where we are...
know better. You're listening for the warning signs. They don't just bite you.
Well, here's the thing. Now, where we are in Minnesota, that snake would be a timber rattlesnake. And yes, they give you usually lots of warning. That's
Most
not
snakes
super...
do.
Yeah, not super common to be bitten by them. And they're actually restricted to a really small range in the southwest corner of our state these days, and bites are extremely rare.
And they haven't
However,
actually been seen since, or one of the species of them haven't been seen since the 1980s, but that's besides the point.
Yeah, I mean, there are hundreds of types of venomous snakes in the world. And so depending on where you live, there's probably some sort of venomous snake not that far from you. And when I was a kid, there was one venomous snake that seemed to reign supreme in my mind as the most deadly.
Was
and
it
that
the king
was
cobra?
The cobra, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that was due to pop culture, right? Like the main bad guy
100%.
organization in G.I. Joe was called Cobra and was headed by Cobra Commander. You also had the movie The Karate Kid, where again the bad guys in the rival dojo was called Cobra Kai. Cobras were also featured in the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark film. When Indiana falls into the Well of Souls, he's confronted by approximately 7,000 snakes is what they used for the production, including a cobra that he comes face to face with. I would like to point out, though, being, the naturalist nerd that I am, the cobra in question in the movie is clearly a monocled cobra due to the single spot on the back of its head, instead of the mostly black Egyptian cobra, which is what would actually be found in, Egypt, where he was, but we'll let that slide.
Makes more sense that way.
So, film inaccuracies aside, the cobra loomed large in my childhood as a fierce, venomous snake. They certainly are venomous, but they're not considered like the most potently toxic.
Right.
There are, however, a lot of them out there, and they are common and willing to strike humans. So even though they're not the most deadly in terms of their venom, they're often considered one of the most deadly simply because they make up a good number of the deadly attacks that happen in the world. Now, cobra taxonomy apparently has been a bit of a mess in the past, but these days we think there's around 32 recognized species of cobras, ranging all the way from North Africa to the Middle East to India, all the way down through southern China and the Malay Peninsula and as far east as the Philippines. So there's cobras in lots of places.
Yeah.
Now, the one you mentioned, the king cobra, I should point out, is technically not a cobra.
Right.
Even though they have that name. So they look similar. They have that large flattened hood. They rear up to strike and intimidate. They are very venomous, but they are technically in a different genus than the rest of the cobras. So technically they're not all that closely related and are considered separate.
Okay.
Now, I wanted to include some good data here about how many people are bitten each year by cobras, but it turns out that it's a really difficult number to gather. Obviously, the number changes from year to year, but also a lot of people show up at a hospital with a snake bite and really have no idea what bit them. It's over very quickly. The snake disappears through heavy vegetation. Maybe they didn't even see the snake at all, or they did see the snake but aren't knowledgeable enough to identify the species.
Right.
What we do know is that globally, there are between like 38,900 and 78,600 deaths from snake bites every year. Now, it sort of
That's
depends
a
on what
lot
data
of
you look at.
deaths.
I did see some numbers as high as 90,000 people dying every year. It varies from year to year and how you compile the numbers, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
However, just to put it into perspective, in case the show makes you afraid of ever going outdoors, 1.2 million people die each year from car accidents.
Right.
So you are way more likely to get hit by a car than bitten by a snake.
Oh, yeah. It's the same concept that people have about sharks, Like, I always bring up the weird wild sharks and everything, and so have you, and I think Victoria has as well. Everyone's always scared about sharks and everything, and sharks attack and all those things. And they kill one person, maybe two a year.
Yeah,
and
you're
that's
more likely
because
to
of blood
die in the
loss.
car on the way to the beach than from a shark in the water at the beach.
Exactly.
Of all the places in the world, India has the most deaths from snake bites, and cobras are one of the most common venomous snakes in India. So it's reasonable to assume that cobras make up a large percentage of the global deaths from snake bites.
Mm-hmm.
Cobra venom is highly toxic. And again, it depends on the subspecies. But if we look at, say, the Pakistani cobra, the LD50, meaning the dose at which 50% of the patients would die, is just 0.22 milligrams per kilogram of body weight.
Oh.
So for someone my size, that means just 18 milligrams could be fatal. And according to one study, each bite from a cobra can deliver between 170 and 250 milligrams of venom, or about 10 times more than is needed to kill a human. So
oh, no.
you can see why these bites are deadly.
Uh-huh.
This is funny. This also kind of like ties right into your topic with
A little bit.
all these toxins, these neurotoxins. Now, I will say, as I was reading through this, I kind of went, wait a minute. Hold on a moment. I think we need to take these numbers with a giant grain of salt, because they seem to imply that if most people get 10 times a lethal dose, and that dose being what would kill half the participants. So if most people are getting 10 times more than the dose that would kill half the people, then we should assume
would
that
be dead.
most people should be dying from cobra bites if they're untreated, right?
Right.
I mean, that would seem to be what the research suggests. However, the untreated fatality rate is only 20 to 30%. So I'm not sure what to make of that. What I think I make of that is that the LD50 number for cobras may be wrong, because those studies are done on mice, not on humans. It's really unethical to start injecting more and more lethal doses of venom into humans to see what happens.
Yup.
And we think those models are pretty good when you work with mice, but they don't always line up exactly with reality.
Well,
so
especially
I think,
since like mice are the prey that the cobras are going to go for too.
yeah, true. I think, clearly it's really bad to be bitten. I don't want to be bitten. It may not be quite as deadly as the LD50 might suggest. So if you are bitten, you need antivenom right away. With antivenom, the fatality rate drops to just 9%. Still not, that's like 1 in 10 people dying. So I really don't want to test that out. But,
No, but it's still that's better.
I would still like to have the antivenom. Interestingly, the antivenom, I didn't realize till I did some reading up on this, is actually a mix of different antivenoms for several species of snakes, because like I said earlier, most people don't actually know what bit them, so they're just sort of this universal antivenom you just give people, depending on what part of the world you're in, that covers the venomous snakes in that area.
Cool.
Now, cobra venom is a neurotoxin. It can cause paralysis, and fatalities often occur when that paralysis reaches the respiratory system and you can't breathe anymore. Once you can't breathe, that's bad. So very similar to what you were talking about.
Oh, yeah. The tetrodotoxin. Yeah.
Yeah. But the reason I got interested in talking this week about cobras is not just because I thought they were really fascinating when I was a kid, but it has to do with a really interesting bit of news that came out recently. It has to do with a rather nasty side effect of cobra bites that isn't really talked about. And I don't think I really realized was an issue. People tend to focus on the life-threatening effects of the cobra venom, but it has other actions as well. In particular, cobra venom can cause tissue necrosis.
Oh, no.
Yeah, or tissue death.
Oh,
so even
no.
even if you survive.
I know where this is going. Oh,
and
no.
you get antivenom, the antivenom doesn't actually, I mean, that stops it from like causing paralysis and killing you. The antivenom does not stop the tissue necrosis.
No,
from
it
the bite.
doesn't.
This can be extremely painful, extremely problematic as your tissues are dying. This can lead to infection. It can leave people deformed. Thousands of people die from cobras every year, but hundreds of thousands, some estimate right around 100,000 people are left deformed due to this necrosis of bites every single year. 100,000 people deformed by cobra bites. And many times, limbs eventually need to be amputated because of this necrosis. So you're going to survive, but you're going to lose your leg or your arm. And so that's a really big deal, especially for people who are maybe living in a little more rural area where they are, maybe doing subsistence farming or something like that, where they need to be able to get every single day doing physical labor in order to feed their families. And all of a sudden
It's
your
harder.
caregiver,
There's not as much
loses a leg.
system to be able to support you.
Yeah, very bad. So what researchers did this year is they used CRISPR technology, which is the gene editing technology, to understand exactly how the venom of cobras functions and why it causes tissue damage. They basically edited a bunch of genes in human cells and exposed them to the venom to better understand what was going on as they turned different genes on and off within these cells. And what they wanted to figure out was, what would a drug look like that you could give someone that would block this, necrosis activity of the venom.
Right.
And it turns out we don't need to create a new drug. One already exists, and it is about as cheap as they possibly come. Yeah.
What?
So the drug is the common blood thinner heparin.
What?
And yeah, it turns out that our cells in our body naturally have heparin and some related compounds that are on the surface of the cells. And the venom uses this, I'm simplifying here, but basically to know what to attack.
Okay.
So if we can flood a person's body with this artificial heparin, then the venom will basically attack the medicine instead of the person. And that's the theory.
Okay.
So this has only been tested in mice. But I just finished saying how the mice may not be the best model always, but it seems to work when they would actually give the mice this heparin. They would inject them with venom, and they did really well. So this is a huge development, as up until this point, there really was not a treatment for the tissue necrosis part of the venom. And discovering a very cheap drug that already exists, that is already mass produced, that can potentially treat this crippling disease is huge. And keep in mind that antivenom is very unstable. It has to be kept refrigerated, and it's very expensive, and you don't have it everywhere. But heparin is just like a pill. I mean, it's this is a very simple
it's
drug.
everywhere.
So,
yeah.
And it's very stable. You can have lots of it around and very cheap. So this could be huge. The researchers are hoping to move to human trials on this. They also think that the same technique could be applied to other types of venoms. So maybe like the flatworms you talked about. The same team had previously used this technique to find a cure for box jellyfish stings. And they are planning right now to look at other venoms in the future. So this is a super, super cool development in the world of humans not being as affected by cobra bites, which is very cool.
That's awesome, Kirk.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. My sources were Wikipedia, Science Alert / The Conversation, the World Health Organization, and the journal article itself called Molecular Dissection of Cobra Venom Highlights Heparinoids as an Antidote for Spitting Cobra Envenoming. And that was in Science Translational Medicine. That's what I have this week for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kirk.
Absolutely. So we both ended up with
toxic
topics that had neurotoxins in them. So sometimes that's how it goes. All right. Well, hey, thanks for stopping in, and we'll see you next time.
See y'all next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's show. Be sure to subscribe. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and we love sharing this strange world with all of our listeners. If you would be so kind as to leave us a 5-star review, that would be great. It lets other lovers of the strange discover the show. You can reach out to us on social media by searching for Strange by Nature Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can send us an email as well. Our address is contact@strangebynaturepodcast.com. If you want more information about the show, you can also check out our website, which is strangebynaturepodcast.com. Until next week, get outside, stay curious, and embrace the strange.